Part 1. The mirror that doesn't reflect. There's a moment quiet, surreal, almost dreamlike when you realize that no matter how much you explain, cry, reason, or beg, the narcissist in your life simply does not hear you. Not in the way you need. Not in the way that brings resolution or healing. You could pour your soul out on the floor in front of them, and they wouldn't kneel down to hold it. They might step over it. They might accuse you of being dramatic. They may even weaponize your vulnerability and use it against you later. That moment when you finally understand that logic, empathy, and truth do not penetrate them is the beginning of a different kind of awakening. It is not the awakening of the narcissist. It is the awakening of you. We begin with a brutal truth. You cannot get through to a narcissist because they have built psychological walls so high, so dense, and so cleverly disguised that even they can't see them. These walls are not just defense mechanisms, they are their identity. To get through to a narcissist would mean asking them to face the parts of themselves they have buried so deeply they no longer know they exist. That confrontation is not simply painful for them, it is annihilating. As Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And the narcissist is the living embodiment of this avoidance. We must understand what lies beneath the narcissist's mask. Not the charming persona, not the inflated ego, not the grandiose stories. Beneath all of that is a fragile, fragmented self that never learned how to regulate shame. Not guilt shame. The deep, existential sense of being unworthy, unlovable, fundamentally broken. The shame is the architecture of the narcissistic psyche. And to survive it, they developed a false self, a performance. A character they play so convincingly that even they forget it's not real. But there's a cost. This false self cannot tolerate contradiction. It cannot tolerate humility. It cannot tolerate growth because growth requires admitting you were once wrong. So when you try to reason with a narcissist, when you present a calm, rational argument, when you offer emotional truths, you are not speaking to a person who is processing in the way you are. You are speaking to a performance, a defense, a wall. As philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote, there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is. Narcissists live in the latter. They refuse truth not because they are evil, but because truth threatens the illusion that protects them from emotional collapse.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now here's where it gets philosophically fascinating and psychologically dangerous. The narcissist doesn't just protect themselves from shame. They project it. They unconsciously assign their darkest feelings to those around them. If they feel inadequate, they accuse you of being weak. If they feel insecure, they mock you for needing reassurance. If they feel lost, they attack you for being crazy. They do not reflect back what they see. They reflect back what they deny. This is why trying to get through to them feels like arguing with a mirror that doesn't reflect your image, it reflects their wound. You might ask, but what if I say it differently? What if I wait until they're calm? What if I catch them at the right time? And here's the difficult truth. It doesn't matter. Because the ego of the narcissist is not situational, it is structural. It is not a mood, it is an entire worldview. They are not simply unwilling to hear you. They are psychologically unable to receive anything that threatens their illusion of control, superiority, or perfection. To get through to a narcissist is to ask them to self-destruct, and no one does that willingly. Let's explore empathy, because here lies another heartbreak. You may be someone who believes in compassion, in understanding, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. And that's beautiful. But when you project your empathy onto a narcissist, you are not helping them, you are harming yourself. They do not interpret your kindness as love. They interpret it as weakness, as leverage, as something to be used. That doesn't mean you stop being kind, it means you start being wise. As Friedrich Nietzsche warned, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Your empathy must not become your prison. So what do we do with this? If we cannot reach them, if we cannot change them, if we cannot awaken them, what is left? What remains is you, your awakening, your clarity, your freedom. You stop trying to decode their chaos and start listening to your own intuition. You stop hoping for accountability and start holding yourself accountable for staying, for tolerating, for believing in what never existed. This is not self-blame. It is self-responsibility. And it is sacred. The first step toward liberation is the death of illusion. You must let the fantasy die. The fantasy that they will one day wake up and say, "You were right. I see it now. I'm sorry." That moment may never come. And if it does, it may not be sincere. Narcissists will often mimic remorse as a manipulative tactic. They will say what you want to hear, not because they've changed, but because they want control back. If your peace depends on their apology, then your peace is still under their power. So ask yourself this: what are you really trying to get from them, truth or permission to leave? This is where philosophy meets psychology at the deepest level. The narcissistic dynamic is not just a relationship problem, it is an existential riddle. You are not merely dealing with a difficult person, you are facing the paradox of your own identity. Who are you when you are no longer trying to fix someone? What happens when you stop performing for love that is never returned? These are the questions that dismantle the false self, not theirs, but yours. Because the truth is, we all have masks. We all have wounds. And sometimes, the reason we stay with narcissists is because they mirror the parts of ourselves we haven't yet healed. This understanding is not meant to create guilt. It's meant to ignite awakening. You are not trapped. You are entangled, and entanglements can be undone not by changing the other, but by changing yourself. The moment you stop trying to get through to them and start getting through to you, everything shifts. You begin to reclaim your time, your peace, your voice. You stop arguing and start observing. You stop pleading and start deciding. You stop hoping and start healing. And perhaps the most radical shift of all, you stop needing closure from them. You give it to yourself. You write the ending. You walk away not with bitterness, but with clarity. You don't need them to understand why you left. You need to understand why you stayed. And once you do, you will never return. This is the first stage of transformation, the breaking of the trance, the shattering of the illusion. In the next part, we will go deeper. We will explore the emotional, philosophical, and spiritual consequences of trying to love someone who cannot meet you. We'll talk about trauma bonding, the myth of the empath, the cost of self-abandonment, and how to retrieve the parts of yourself you lost in the process. Part 2, the illusion of the empath and the death of the self. There is a kind of quiet tragedy that unfolds in the heart of those who love narcissists. It is not the loud, dramatic kind of suffering. It is slow, subtle, and it often wears the mask of hope. You keep telling yourself that if you just love them enough, if you speak more gently, if you are more patient, if you understand them more deeply, they will finally see you, finally change, finally love you the way you've loved them. But what if the very depth of your love is not healing them, it's feeding their illusion? What if your empathy is not saving them, it's erasing you? This is where we must confront a deeply uncomfortable truth. Narcissists don't fall in love with people. They fall in love with sources of emotional supply. They don't connect to your soul, they connect to your utility, your attention, your praise, your vulnerability. And when you stop providing what they need to inflate their false self, they discard you or devalue you. Not because you changed, but because you stopped being useful. This is not love. This is consumption. And yet, so many of us stay not because we're weak, but because we've been conditioned to mistake endurance for love. Let us now unravel one of the most seductive and dangerous roles in the narcissistic dynamic, the empath. The word itself has become spiritual currency. It sounds noble, sacred, elevated. And yes, empathy is a profound human capacity. But when empathy is not paired with discernment, it becomes self-destruction. When you feel responsible for healing everyone's pain, you forget to protect your own soul. You absorb what is not yours. You excuse what should be confronted. You stay in relationships that are slowly killing your spirit because you believe it is your job to fix what someone else refuses to face. This is the illusion of the empath. The myth that you must sacrifice yourself in the name of love. That you must understand the narcissist so deeply that they finally awaken. But here's the truth. You cannot love someone into consciousness. You cannot hold enough pain for two people. You cannot carry someone's shadow and expect to stay whole. Jung warned us of this when he said, to confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. Once one has experienced what it is like to stand judgingly before one's own shadow, one has crossed a decisive threshold. The narcissist refuses to cross it, and you cannot drag them across. So what happens instead? You cross it for them. You take on their shame, their rage, their projections. You compromise your needs. You betray your boundaries. You become smaller, quieter, more agreeable. And still, it is not enough. Because it was never about who you are, it was only ever about how you serve their false self. The deeper tragedy is that, in the process, you begin to lose your own reflection. You look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. Not because you're broken, but because you've been eroded. This erosion is not random. It is patterned. It is psychological, and it is known as trauma bonding. Trauma bonding occurs when intermittent reinforcement cycles of abuse followed by moments of affection creates a powerful addictive loop in the brain. You begin to associate pain with love. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You crave their approval the way a starving person craves food. And the more you are hurt, the more you try to earn their affection. It's not logical, it's chemical, it's neurological. And until you break the pattern, you will mistake suffering for devotion. Here's the philosophical paradox. The more you love someone who cannot love, the more you become estranged from yourself. You begin to doubt your reality. You gaslight your own intuition. You rewrite your memories to justify their behavior. You tell yourself, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I am the problem. This is not love. This is psychological warfare. And the battlefield is your own mind. So we must ask, why do we stay? Why do we keep trying to get through to someone who is emotionally unreachable? The answer is rarely simple. Sometimes it is rooted in childhood, where we learned that love had to be earned, where emotional neglect was normalized, where we became hyper-attuned to the moods of caregivers who were inconsistent or cruel. Sometimes it is rooted in culture and religious teachings that glorify sacrifice, or societal norms that tell women to endure and men to suppress. And sometimes it is simply because we saw their potential. We glimpsed the hurt child beneath the mask, and we believed with all our hearts that if we could just love them enough, they would finally feel safe enough to change. But here's the most painful truth of all. Potential is not a relationship. It is a projection. And when you fall in love with someone's potential, you are not in love with them, you are in love with your fantasy of who they could be. You are not relating to their reality. You are relating to your hope. And hope, when misused, becomes a prison. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." In the narcissistic relationship, you are trying to define yourself through someone who does not even see you as real. You are biting your own soul. And the more you try to be seen, the more invisible you become. Because narcissists do not see people, they see mirrors. And when you stop reflecting what they want to see, they shatter you. The recovery from this is not a single moment, it is a sacred process. It begins when you finally stop waiting for validation. When you stop explaining, stop hoping, stop trying to resurrect the relationship. It begins when you turn inward and reclaim the parts of yourself that you lost in the battle. Your voice, your intuition, your worth, your anger. Yes, even your anger, it is holy. It is the fire that burns away delusion. It is the energy that says, no more. And this is where the journey becomes spiritual. Because to walk away from a narcissist is not just to leave a person, it is to leave a false version of yourself. It is to bury the martyr, the savior, the fixer. It is to let die the identity you built around their validation. And that kind of death is terrifying. But it is also the beginning of rebirth. As the philosopher Heraclitus wrote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man." You are not who you were. You are not who they made you believe you were. You are someone becoming. So ask yourself this: who would you be if you were no longer trying to be chosen? This question is not rhetorical. It is a doorway. And walking through it requires grief. You must grieve the relationship, yes, but also the fantasy. The future you imagined. The love you gave that was never returned. the years you lost, the parts of yourself you abandoned just to survive. Grief is not weakness, it is truth. And truth is what sets you free. But freedom comes with responsibility. You cannot awaken and then return to sleep. You cannot see clearly and then pretend to be blind. Once you know what you know, you must change. Not because you are forced, but because your soul demands it. And that change is not about revenge. It's not about proving anything. It's about alignment with your values, with your peace, with your power. And so, we arrive at the final threshold. In the next part, we will speak of healing, of sovereignty, of how to rebuild your life from the ashes. We will explore how to reclaim your voice, your joy, your purpose, not by pretending the pain didn't happen, but by allowing it to become your teacher. Not by avoiding the past, but by transcending it. Part 3. Reclaiming the self, rebuilding the soul. Healing after a narcissistic experience is not about moving on in the way people casually say it. It's not a clean break. It's not a straight line. It is the slow, sacred process of returning to yourself piece by piece, memory by memory, truth by truth. And it begins with a single, radical decision. I will no longer abandon myself for love that demands my silence. Because that's what it often comes down to, doesn't it? Not just the suffering you endured, but the version of yourself you had to become just to survive it. Be kind instead of honest. Quiet instead of clear. Forgiving instead of walking away. That version of you was not weak. It was sacred. It kept you alive. But now it is time to become who you were before you learned you had to shrink. We must begin by redefining power. In the narcissistic relationship, power was always imbalanced. They controlled the narrative. They defined the terms of love. They decided when you were worthy and when you were disposable. So now, in the absence of that dynamic, you might feel lost not just emotionally, but existentially. Who are you when you are no longer orbiting their moods? What do you believe in when you are no longer filtered through their projections? These are not easy questions. They are spiritual questions. And they require you to go deeper than you ever have before, not into them, but into you. The first step in reclaiming your power is to reclaim your perception. You were trained to doubt yourself, to question your memory, to mistrust your feelings. This is no accident. It is the result of gaslighting, a psychological manipulation so subtle and persistent that it fractures your relationship with reality. So healing begins by saying to yourself, what I saw, I saw. What I felt, I felt. What I needed, I deserved. This is not about vilifying them. It's about validating you. Because until you believe your own story, you will keep looking for someone else to tell it. And too often, that someone is the person who erased it in the first place. Next, you must reestablish boundaries not just with others, but with your own mind. Because long after the narcissist is gone, their voice may still echo in your thoughts. You may hear them when you make a mistake, when you try something new, when you speak your truth. That voice may say, you're too much, you're selfish, you'll never be loved. But that voice is not your intuition. It is not your soul. It is a ghost, and you must learn to name it, to speak back to it, to say, that is not mine. Because healing is not just about releasing a person, it is about releasing the version of yourself that believed their voice was truth. And here is where something miraculous begins to happen. As you create space within yourself by grieving, by naming, by releasing, something new begins to grow. You begin to hear your own voice again. At first it may be quiet, hesitant, unsure, but it is there, and it says things you may have forgotten. I want that. I don't like this. I need rest. I deserve peace. These words are not selfish. They are sacred. They are the building blocks of a new identity, one not rooted in trauma, but in truth. This is what philosophers call individuation, becoming whole, not by adding more to yourself, but by integrating what was lost. Carl Jung described it as the process through which a person becomes individual, indivisible, no longer split between who they are and who they pretend to be. And here's the deep wisdom. The pain you experienced was not meaningless. It was a mirror, a crucible, a sacred fire through which the false self was burned away. You are not who you were before the narcissist. You are more. You are wiser. You are awake. But healing is not only internal, it is relational. You must learn how to be with others again without losing yourself. This is perhaps the most difficult part, because after narcissistic abuse, intimacy can feel dangerous. Vulnerability can feel like a trap. You may find yourself guarded, suspicious, even cold. This is normal. It is the body remembering what it cost to be open. But you must not stay there, because the goal is not to become hardened. It is to become discerning, to know the difference between a red flag and a real connection, between love bombing and real love, between chemistry and compatibility. So how do you do this? You rebuild trust, not in others, in yourself. You begin to trust your instincts again. You learn to recognize the early signs of manipulation. You practice saying no, even when your voice shakes. You teach your nervous system that safety is not silence, it is self-expression. And slowly you begin to build a life where you are not performing, not proving, not chasing, but simply being. And that is the ultimate healing. Not revenge, not vindication, not even understanding, but peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need justification. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. The kind of peace that comes when you realize you don't need to be gotten through to either. You are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You are here to know it, to live it, to embody it so fully that anyone who cannot honor it simply falls away. Let's pause and ask the deepest question of all. If you never again needed to be understood, validated, or accepted by anyone outside yourself, what would you do? Who would you become? What would you stop tolerating? What would you finally create? This is not a hypothetical exercise. It is the doorway to your next life. Because the truth is, the narcissist was never the main character. You were. And now that the illusion has shattered, you get to rewrite the story. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a sovereign soul who walked through the fire and came out gold. And yes, it will take time. There will be days when the grief returns, when the self-doubt creeps in, when you miss what never really was. But on those days, come back to this truth: you made it out. You saw what others couldn't. You chose yourself when it would have been easier to stay asleep. That is not weakness. That is power. That is awakening. That is the beginning of a new world, not one where you finally get through to them, but one where you finally get through to you. And in that world, you don't chase love. You become it. You don't explain your worth. You embody it. You don't wait to be chosen. You choose yourself every single day. This is the path, the philosophy, the psychology, the truth. You can't get through to a narcissist, but you can get through to yourself. And when you do, everything changes.